Hi, this is Mark Birch with a quick revision of John Donne's selected poems. Welcome back to part 2. The second stanza begins with an indication of the cause of the poetic voice's sorrow, love. The poetic voice commands those who seek to love to study me, and that imperative verb conveys the urgency of the warning to be found in the state of the poetic voice. The study should take place at the next world. Given the focus on death at the conclusion of the previous stanza, it could be assumed that this next world is the afterlife. But Donne prophetically undermines that expectation, identifying it as the next spring. The poetic voice is so closely aligned with nothingness that the season associated with new life is another world to him. He uses the conceit of alchemy to convey the extent of his emptiness. His nihilistic claim, "I am every dead thing," hyperbolically introduces this sense of lifelessness. Love's personified as an alchemist. It transforms the poetic voice, creating a quintessence, that fabled fifth element associated with the elixir of eternal life. Yet this is the quintessence of death and emptiness, an inversion of the alchemist's conventional goal. Love, the alchemist, draws upon absences in order to create nothingness, dull privations, and lean emptiness. The semantic field of absence reinforces the hyperbolic representation of the poetic voice's loss. Love has essentially ruined the poetic voice and remade him as a being of nothingness. The paradox of being brought back into existence through things that lack existence serves to reinforce the poetic voice's claim that he is the essence of death, the ideal form of nothingness, ideal in a Platonic sense. The poetic voice is re-begot in an inversion of the creation story found in the book of Genesis. Begat's an archaic verb that's got biblical connotations. For example, and unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mehuel, and Mehuel begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech, etc. So in the creation story of Genesis 1, God dispels the absence of the void. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. He creates light and life, yet here Donne describes the reverse. Once again, it's another inversion. Love creates him from the absences dismissed by God. This sense of the poetic voice as the ideal form of nothingness is conveyed through the use of asyndeton in the final line. The list of elements associated with absence seems endless. Absence, darkness, death. And that excess is complemented phonologically through the hard consonants of the plosive d, the sibilant sounds and the sharp assonance of e. So combining all of those together gives this sense of it being overwhelming, an absolute excess of nothingness, again sounding paradoxical. In the third stanza, Donne begins with a comparison between the poetic voice and all others. While they're created from all that's good, he is the opposite, not in terms of being created from evil, but created from nothingness. The comparison is introduced through the asyndetic list of life, soul, form, spirit. These are the essences of life and the things that the poetic voice claims to lack. The asyndeton conveys the overwhelming aspects of being, and by implication, the overwhelming lack of existence in terms of the poetic voice. The alchemical conceits develop still further through the reference to a almbeck, an alchemical device used in the process of distillation. The poetic voice claims to be the distillation or essence of nothingness. Again, a paradox is evident here in the phrase "all that's nothing," rendering the poetic voice's state logically meaningless, just as he believes himself to be. It also creates a hyperbolic representation of the nothingness that he embodies. That nothingness is even more ostentatiously represented through the metaphor of being the grave of all that's nothing. This reintroduces the concept of death and represents the poetic voice chromomorphically as something that not only lacks life, but functions merely as an emblem of nothingness, of death. and the sense of an ending is reinforced by the caesura that follows the word nothing. Donne exploits Petrarchan images of emotional excess in the reference to tears that cause a flood, which can drown the world. It's an image that is used or mocked in a variety of poems like the canonizations, songs, Sweetest Love I Do Not Go, and the valediction of weeping. The religious concepts employed in the second stanza could suggest that this reference to the flood could be an allusion to the biblical flood, with its connotations of global destruction. Donne, as he so often does, describes the two lovers as a microcosm. As such, the tears that destroy their world destroy the whole world. His introduction of the lover focuses on the binary nature of their existence. Two is repeated 3 times in this stanza, while plural pronouns are used 6 times. The poetic voice continues to reflect on the relationship, describing how, when the pair of them gave any attention to anything else, they both became 2 chaoses, driven mad by jealousy. If they were separated, their souls would separate from their bodies, given they maintained the union of the soul, and made their bodies lifeless carcasses. It's a concept developed in the ecstasy. The overwhelming sense is that the couple are nothing without one another. Hence, in the 4th stanza, Donne reveals why the poetic voice now believes himself to be less than nothing. His lover is dead. He suggests that language is inadequate to convey his loss. The word death wrongs her. There's a sense in which the use of this word is so commonplace and therefore completely inappropriate to the devastating nature of the loss that he has experienced. He then returns to the motif of nothingness and the conceit of alchemy, drawing on once again the biblical concept of creation and conjoining each of them, of the first nothing, the elixir grown. The first nothing could refer to the Augustinian concept of creation in the mind of God, prior to the act of creation itself. It's nothingness in an idealized form. But as a result of his lover's death, the poetic voice is transformed into the elixir or quintessence of that first nothing, the pure essence of this pure nothingness. It's the hyperbole of devastation. The dehumanized poetic voice compares himself to other aspects of creation and finds himself lacking in comparison. His existential concerns accept that he was a man, but he now knows that he's less than all other forms of creation. Animals, he claims, have goals and actions, some ends, some means, and he also claims that even plants and stones have feelings. All of these things have particular characteristics. Some properties invest. But he is even less than an ordinary nothing. He uses the simile of a shadow to represent the idea of a nothing or an absence. But even such a nothing requires light and body to exist. Therefore, it has to have some form of connection to the world, unlike him. The final stanza rejects the idea of the poetic voice having any of the essence referred to in the penultimate stanza. It also functions as a declarative that reasserts that he is nothing or none, but I am none. Nor will my sun renew, however, is ambiguous. It may refer back to the second stanza's next spring, where life will be renewed through the changing season. And that seasonal interpretation is supported later in the final stanza through references to enjoy your summer all. It may also function as a figurative sun, representing the dead lover. The light of his life will never be renewed. Less convincingly, sun may function as a homophonic pun. His sun will not be renewed. The lover may be Donne's dead wife Anne. In fact, that seems the most credible interpretation. And 5 of Donne's children died before reaching adulthood, so he maybe will not have an opportunity to have another son. It will not renew. And similarly, sun may homophonically refer to the Son of God. With the loss of his lover, the poetic voice has an attendant loss of faith. The lesser sun appears to be a reference to the literal sun, in contrast to the figurative son of the poetic voice is love. The most powerful celestial force is inferior to his love and his beloved. The goat's a reference to Capricorn, the sign of the zodiac entered by the sun on the 12th of December, according to the Julian calendar, which is the day before St. Lucy's Day. So under Capricorn, the days will lengthen and bring vitality back to the world. The poetic voice presents this vitality as lust for lovers. The goat's also a creature symbolically associated with lust. The lovers seem to be those same lovers that were addressed in the second stanza, but the tone here is ambiguous. The poetic voice could be mocking those lovers who are subject to the vagaries of physical attraction, driven by the changing seasons and the vitality imparted by the sun. But there may also be a melancholic tone, as the poetic voice wishes others to enjoy those pleasures which he's now denied given the death of his love. The tone of enjoys is certainly sardonic, given that it refers to the poetic voice's dead lover. And Donne employs a conceit of religious observance here, using words from the semantic field of religious ceremony: festival, prepare, vigil, eve. The poetic voice is presented as worshipping his lost love, at this time, given its aptness to such worship of death. It's the darkest time of the year, just as her loss is the darkest point in his life. So by proposing a vigil for his lost love, the poetic voice venerates her as a saint, canonizing her just as Lucy is canonized. The poem ends with the cyclical reference to the first lines, "'Tis the year's midnight and 'tis the day's." The cyclical structure conveys the poetic voice's eternal suffering as a result of his loss, because we hear that echo of the first line in the final line. He adds the adjective deep, however, to the final line, reinforcing the depth of his loss. The consonance of that plosive de complements the sense of the eternal, and the phonologically hollow repetition captures the absence that's felt throughout the poem. So we'll end with a quick look at the structure. In terms of the form, it's an elegy. It deals with death, of course. Death is its central concern throughout the poem. Stanzas, 5 9-line stanzas, and the rhyme scheme ABBA, CCC, DD, and the meter, it's composed of trochaic pentameter, iambic tetrameter, iambic trimeter, and iambic pentameter. Overall, we've got this sense of regularity. There's a kind of monotony and a perpetuation of structural forms that really reinforces this sense of the eternal nature of the poetic voice's suffering, that they are damned to eternal nothingness and emptiness as a result of the loss of their love. A cheery way to end a pretty depressing poem. Okay, take care, folks. Bye.